right, continuing on then with Gravity's Rainbow. In this video, we will cover the next 4 episodes, episodes 15 through 18. And we're almost done after these. There's only 19, 20, 21 left in part 1. So we're finishing up part 1 here. So episode 15 begins now with Slothrop being released from St. Veronica's Hospital. He had been in there, recall, as a test subject where they were giving him sodium amytal, and he had had the sodium amytal fantasies about the cowboy guy and Malcolm X and so forth. So Slothrop's unconscious is kind of amusing. He's a walking museum of pop culture references, and he takes on more and more of that as the narrative goes along. But after he gets out, he's walking along the street, and he's beginning to suspect now that people are following him. And he's correct, because Pisces has now, the white visitation has now taken an interest in him, as we have seen. So he is being followed, but he's picking up on it. He knows he's being followed. Then he runs into one of his previous girlfriends, or sexual conquests, I suppose, Darlene, and goes back to her flat with her, where she lives with an old woman named Mrs. Quode, which is Latin for as much as. Since he's about to get as much candy as he can possibly stand, in one of the novel's funniest sections, where she sits and all these bizarre, I don't know how Pynchon, the dude's an encyclopedia. He found out all these things about weird British candies, and they sound absolutely disgusting. They're very bizarre and complex and strange. And so Slothrop doesn't want to say no, and he remembers that when he was with Darlene before, in the same apartment that Mrs. Quode had done this to him before, she just keeps giving him another candy. Now try this one. Oh, now you have to try that one. And Pynchon's verbosity is absolutely extraordinary. The way that he describes each candy exploding in Slothrop's mouth, all the tastes. It's a tour de force of writing. This guy is quite amazing. An example, let's say, "You've taken the last of my marmalade surprises," cries Mrs. Quode, having now with conjurer's speed produced an egg-shaped confection of pastel green, studded all over with lavender nonpareils. "Just for that, I shan't let you have any of these marvelous rhubarb creams." Into her mouth it goes, the whole thing. "Serves me right," Slothrop, wondering just what he means by this, sipping herb tea to remove the taste of the mayonnaise candy. Whoops, but that's a mistake, right? Here's his mouth filling once again with horrible alkaloid desolation, all the way back to the soft palate where it digs in. Darlene, pure nightingale compassion, is handing him a hard red candy molded like a stylized raspberry. Which, oddly enough, even tastes like a raspberry, though it can't begin to take away that bitterness. Impatiently, he bites into it, and in the act knows, fucking idiot, he's been had once more. There comes pouring out onto his tongue the most god-awful crystalline concentration of, geez, it must be pure nitric acid. Oh, mercy, that's really sour. Hardly able to get the words out, he's so puckered up. Exactly the sort of thing Hop Harrigan used to pull to get Tinker to quit playing his ocarina. A shabby trick then, and twice as reprehensible coming from an old lady who's supposed to be one of our allies. Shit, he can't even see. It's up his nose, and whatever it is won't dissolve, just goes on torturing his shriveling tongue and crunches like ground glass among his molars. And so on. It's absolutely hysterically funny. But then after they're done, he goes upstairs and has sex with Darlene. So then the chapter ends with then a rocket strike, of course, hitting the building. Slams right into the apartment building, but Darlene and Slothrop are okay. So once again, after a sexual episode, here comes the rocket. So then episode 16 is told from the point of view of Roger Mexico and Jessica Swan Lake. It's just a chapter, kind of a character exploration of their relationship and what it's like. A lot of very explicit descriptions of their sex, and the fact that Roger Mexico is really jealous of her other lover, this guy that she's two-timing him with named Beaver, and that he puts up with it is the sign of a very weak man. I wouldn't put up with that shit for one fucking second, I'll tell you that. So there's that. Mexico's a little bit pathetic, I think, and it just wanders for a while. That chapter is kind of meandering. Then episode 17 is told now from the point of view of Pynchon, and he's sitting just sort of musing about his life and fantasizing about himself, how women don't like him. He's the exact opposite in this sense of Slothrop. Women avoid him. They find him creepy for some reason. And he's sitting here fantasizing about wanting to win the Nobel Prize for figuring out this whole connection between Slothrop and the rocket that's been, with the classical conditioning that's been forced upon him through Dr. Laszlo Yamf. But then we also learn now that St. Veronica's Hospital had a rocket hit it just recently, right after, of course, Slothrop was released from it, and the rocket struck there, and it killed Dr. Kevin Spectro, the guy that we had seen Pynchon going to visit when he had the toilet bowl on his foot. So he's dead, and he's sitting here musing now about his life and how much he wants to. He's on the trail of Slothrop. He really wants to get him, but the other thing is they've already sent Slothrop to the French Riviera. He just has a mention here that Slothrop must be in the Riviera by now. So within one day of being released from St. Veronica's Hospital, the Army has sent him straight to the French Riviera, where Part 2 will open up. And then we get this wonderful chapter, chapter 18, which is one of my favorites, that deals with paranormal phenomena and psychics and mediums and so forth. And we get this one medium that we encountered way back when we first met Roger Mexico and Jessica Swanlake, and they were attending a seance held by Carol Eventier. I did not know it, but he is actually the official medium working for the White Visitation. He's part of the Pisces Project. So he contacts the dead. There's a character named Peter Zaxa, who's a character who was beaten to death in the 1930s in a street mob thing. And he talks to him a lot on the other side. It seems like Pynchon takes the existence of the other side seriously, as do I, and as well as mediums. I've experimented with mediums and so forth. So it's very interesting to see that he has a positive attitude toward that. And then he talks about some of the other characters who have odd talents at Pisces. This character named Ronald Cherrycoke, who indeed, for those of you who have read Mason and Dixon, right on the first page of it is his distant ancestor, the Reverend Cherrycoke. And it's not a joke, as I first thought when Mason and Dixon came out, on Coca-Cola's product of Cherrycoke, because this book was written in 70, 71, 72, came out in 73, long before Cherrycoke as a product was ever invented. So it's not a joke on Cherrycoke. But he's a psychometrist, Ronald Cherrycoke, and he's having this relationship with a woman named Nora, and he has some sort of ability to just get into people's minds and see images and flashes, bits of their lives. And so he has been investigating bits and pieces of things that once belonged to Group Captain Bashar San Blas, who was one of the bomber pilots now, and this is a very important section, who participated in the firebombing of Lubeck, which took place on Palm Sunday, I think March 28th, 1942. And it was the first of the very shameful, extraordinarily shameful, every bit as shameful as the concentration camps, every bit without question. And it's not many people either know about the firebombings or realize how horrific they are. So I'm going to read a passage here from W.G. Sebald, the great German contemporary novelist who, unfortunately, his career was cut short after he wrote only 4 novels. But he discusses all of this in his wonderful nonfiction book on the natural history of destruction. And he has a very vivid description of the firebombing then of Hamburg, which took place a year later in the summer, in July of 1943, and was way, 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 way worse than Lubeck. I think with Lubeck was a port city, totally strategically non-important. This was all about the British ego. That's all it was. It was pure RAF ego. The reason for that being is that England was out of the loop. At that point in the war in 1942, they were pretty much on the margins and weren't being taken very seriously by the Nazis. The Nazis had conquered all of Europe, and they were just one success after the next. It was effortless for them to do this until they made the mistake, of course, of turning against the Russians. Same mistake Napoleon made, and exactly the same kind of conquest. And then they were just getting ready to move into Africa and Asia as well. And the British are like, well, what are we going to do in this war? Hey, let's just bomb the shit out of a civilian target that's not even strategic, has nothing to do with military anything. Let's just punish them and make them go, oh, wow, the British, wow. And indeed, this first firebombing, only like, I think about 300 civilians died. It was nowhere near the severity of Hamburg, where 42,000 civilians were roasted to death. The Allies rather transformed the city of Hamburg into a giant oven where people were baked to death, suffocated, and roasted. 42,000. And then they did it again with Dresden in 1945 in April, right before the ending of the war. They did it again, which was just about almost on the same scale as Hamburg. So let me read you this passage here from Sebald, which makes this very vivid, and the whole reason for why Hitler decided to step up production on the revenge weapons, the Vergeltungswaffe, the rockets. So Sebald writes, in the summer of 1943, during a long heat wave, the RAF, supported by the U.S. 8th Army Air Force, flew a series of raids on Hamburg. The aim of Operation Gomorrah, as it was called, was to destroy the city and reduce it as completely as possible to ashes. In a raid early in the morning of July 27th, beginning at 1 a.m., 10,000 tons of high explosive and incendiary bombs were dropped on the densely populated residential area east of the Elbe, comprising the districts of Hammerbrook, Hamm Nord, and Hamm Süd, Bilver Ausschlag, and parts of St. George, Eilbeck, Barmbek, and Wansbeck. A now familiar sequence of events occurred. First, all the doors and windows were torn from their frames and smashed by high explosive bombs weighing 4,000 pounds. Then the attic floors of the buildings were ignited by lightweight incendiary mixtures, and at the same time fire bombs weighing up to 15 kilograms fell into the lower stories. Within a few minutes, huge fires were burning all over the target area, which covered some 20 square kilometers, and they merged so rapidly that only a quarter of an hour after the first bombs had dropped, the whole airspace was a sea of flames as far as the eye could see. Another 5 minutes later, at 1:20 a.m., a firestorm of an intensity that no one would ever before have thought possible arose. The fire, now rising 2,000 meters into the sky, snatched oxygen to itself so violently that the air currents reached hurricane force, resonating like mighty organs with all their stops pulled out at once. The fire burned like this for 3 hours. At its height, the storm lifted gables and roofs from buildings, flung rafters and entire advertising billboards through the air, tore trees from the ground, and drove human beings before it like living torches. Behind collapsing facades, the flames shot up as high as houses, rolled like a tidal wave through the streets at a speed of over 150 kilometers an hour, spun across open squares in strange rhythms like rolling cylinders of fire. The water in some of the canals was ablaze. The glass in the tramcar windows melted. Stocks of sugar boiled in the bakery cellars. Those who had fled from their air-raid shelters sank with grotesque contortions in the thick bubbles thrown up by the melting asphalt. No one knows for certain how many lost their lives that night or how many went mad before they died. When day broke, the summer dawn could not penetrate the leaden gloom above the city. The smoke had risen to a height of 8,000 meters, where it spread like a vast anvil-shaped cumulonimbus cloud. A wavering heat, which the bomber pilots said they had felt through the sides of their planes, continued to rise from the smoking, glowing mounds of stone. Residential districts so large that their total street length amounted to 200 kilometers were utterly destroyed. Horribly disfigured corpses lay everywhere. Bluish little phosphorus flames still flickered around many of them. Others had been roasted brown or purple and reduced to a third of their normal size. They lay doubled up in pools of their own melted fat, which had sometimes already congealed. The central death zone was declared off limits in the next few days. When punishment labor gangs and camp inmates could begin clearing it in August, after the rubble had cooled down, they found people still sitting at tables or up against walls where they had been overcome by monoxide gas. Elsewhere, clumps of flesh and bone or whole heaps of bodies had cooked in the water gushing from bursting boilers, Other victims had been so badly charred and reduced to ashes by the heat, which had risen to 1,000 degrees or more, that the remains of families consisting of several people could be carried away in a single laundry basket. So that's Siebold's very vivid description of the firebombing of Hamburg. Lubeck is basically the same thing, but on a somewhat smaller scale. And so this pilot then, that Ronald Cherrycoke, as a psychometrist, has been studying, San Blas, reports seeing an angel while they are firebombing Lubeck. And he sees an angel, this gigantic being that may have been inspired, and probably was actually, by Rilke's great angels. Pynchon has references all throughout to Rilke's great cycle of poems, the Duino Elegies. And I noticed too, interesting connection back to Lot 49. I didn't know this, but on the opening page it says that Rilke wrote this under the patronage of the aristocrat Marie von Thurn und Taxis, the aristocrats who were in charge of the postal system that we studied in Lot 49. Interesting how Pynchon's world just weaves. It's so complex. But it's worth remembering the opening lines of this. Who, if I cried out, would hear me among the angelic orders? And even if one of them pressed me suddenly to his heart, I'd be consumed in his stronger existence. For beauty is nothing but the beginning of terror, which we can just barely endure, and we stand in awe of it as it coolly disdains to destroy us. Every angel is terrifying. And so the description of the angel here, this isn't, in Pynchon, is not a new agey, oh, look at this warm, loving being. This is an angel of apocalypse. And Pynchon refers here to a card from the tarot deck of Ouspensky in his book on the tarot. And if you look that card up, it's card number 20, called Judgment. And it shows an angel with red wings and blowing the Gabriel horn, that announces the apocalypse and a bunch of the dead who are coming up out of the ground. Interesting that we have this obsession, or at least recently have had, with zombies in our culture, because the living dead were always associated with the apocalypse. It was always the biblical idea that during the end, Gabriel would blow his horn and all the dead would crawl up out of their tombs. So Pynchon has this a definite apocalyptic image here as this angel is hovering over the firebombing of Lubeck, and the captain sees it. Comically, though, he refuses to report it. Another guy saw it too, and the woman that he would have reported it to, he refused to because she had failed to report a couple of other comical sightings. And I love these, where it says, Group Captain San Blas did not include an account of this angel in his official debriefing. The WAF officer who interrogated him being known around the base as the worst sort of literal-minded dragon. She had reported Blovet to psychiatric for his rainbowed Valkyrie over Peenemünde. I love that. The British bombed Peenemünde in 1943, by the way, just as it was getting going, and they bombed the shit out of it. And so they had to move the rocket production program to a place called Nordhausen, a mountain basically, where everything was then from then on done underground with slave labor from the concentration camps. And then also and Creepum for the bright blue gremlins scattering like spiders off of his Typhoon's wings and falling gently to the woods of the Hague in little parachutes of the same color. I love his Pynchon's imagination. It's just, it never ceases to delight me. He's so much fun. And then Carol Eventier, the medium, then picks this up from Ronald Cherrycoke, and he tries talking with the wingman who participated with San Blas, who should also have seen this apparition, but it's not successful. He doesn't really learn much talking to him. And Peter Zoxa, the dead guy on the other side that's been talking to him, doesn't really have much to say about it either, only that he says that there might have been a whole bunch of angels, but you only saw one. He says, Peter Zoxa intimated that there were in fact many versions of the angel which might apply. So interesting. And so that's it pretty much for this episode 18. And then it ends by bringing in two more new characters with Franz and Lenny Prokler. And they are connected actually with this dead person, Peter Zoxa, that Carol Eventier has been communicating with on the other side. So we'll see what their connection is with Saxa as this goes along, and then Pynchon's universe just keeps getting more and more and more complex, and the dude's mind is absolutely extraordinary.